Global Entrepreneurship Research Network, once again, has continued to get the support and backing of the Kauffman Foundation. And we've continued over the course of the last year to take all the data that we took from the last Global Entrepreneurship Congress and put out a variety of priorities that we learned about, which were more entrepreneur-based. And I think what I wanted to have a chance to do this morning is essentially do nothing really more but to get Phil started. But to make sure that we have had a chance to understand the context in which GERN is lying within the Global Entrepreneurship Congress and within GEN, because I know we have a couple of new faces around the table. So, and the most important message is that when we began this, this was really a research engine more around macroeconomic research. And in the pursuit of research projects that were always driven by the agenda of the institutions that were a member of GERN. But we've increasingly shifted to integrating GERN into the broader work of the Global Entrepreneurship Network, and in using all the other nodes of the network to be able to inform GERN. To inform GERN not just about what research may be available because it's collectively research that you're already pursuing, but also to enable GERN to take advantage and to be informed about where the demands are coming from the various elements of the global ecosystem. And obviously we talk first and foremost to entrepreneurs, but increasingly we're now surveying the entrepreneurial support organizations and asking them where do they see the gaps in the national ecosystems, what is the knowledge that they think we should be looking, or data we should be collecting, on analysis we should be looking to do. So Phil's going to talk a little bit more about that shift. But I did want to emphasize that while you're here at the Congress, you can get to see all of the 30 or 40 other global communities that we now have that make up the Global Entrepreneurship Network, whether in policy, whether in or in terms of programming, and programming, you know, in the space of either ranging from finance to startup community programs to scale-up programs across the board. So what we want you to think about is that GERN has that opportunity to tap into those communities and to really gather data. And we finished it. I think closed the survey last night, but we have done a Kauffman survey of the participants to ask questions. Some of you may have participated in that. And we'll be gathering that information to be able to make that available to you so that we can hear what people said before going into the Congress. So without further ado, I'll turn over to my co-chair and academic director,
Thank you.
Phil Auerswald. Thank you very much for being here. We look forward to a very productive day. Thanks.
Okay, so who does not have a phone or a tablet or a computer with them? Does anybody not have a phone or a tablet or computer? Good. Okay, that's good. So everybody make sure that your device is online. Like make sure that you're logged in to a Wi-Fi or some kind of connectivity, because we're going to be using this all day long. Okay, so just take a couple minutes to do that. All right, if you are logged in, you can take a jump ahead and go to Slido, SLI.do. SLI.do. I don't have a whiteboard in our, but you can see it at the bottom there, Slido, SLI.do. Okay? And if you're in Slido, then it's going to ask you for an event code. Your event code is Y, the letter Y, and the number's 044. Y044. Okay? And then if all of that happened the way it should have, you should see this screen. All right, so now if you see this screen, then you can enter the appropriate number. We have had our first GERN annual meeting was in Moscow in 2014. It's 2018. We've had 4 GERN annual meetings. So if you've been to all 4, I've been to all 4. So I'm going to say all 4. Send, and I have now responded. Great. Okay, the responses are coming in. That's beautiful. Oh, I didn't, see, and look at me. Can I edit my poll yet? Okay, so oh my goodness, this was our test one, but actually I could have done a better job with our test one because obviously 0 should be an option. 0 needs to be an option.
1 is today.
Well, 1 could be today, but then it should be 5. But anyway, how about no, but I didn't say that. It's a test one. So if it was supposed to be 0, you can raise your hand. We'll do that as a, I just literally did it 2 minutes ago. Okay, so everybody responded? You think you responded? All right, let's see. Keep responding. I'm still seeing responses come in. Let's give it just one more minute. Oh, edit, hold on, edit. Hold on, oh, I can add an option. I can add 0. Okay, good. All right, here, I'm adding 0. Save. All right, if you weren't happy with the options before, then you now have 0. Okay? Kelly's going berserk over here. Our survey guy is going totally nuts, but Kelly, it's okay. It's on the fly. This is the entrepreneurship side, not the real hardcore data gathering, okay?
Can you repeat the code again for some people?
The code, again, is Y, the letter Y, the number 0, the number 4, the number 4. Y044. Okay? All right, we're going to use this all day long. So don't log out of this. Don't close the browser screen because it's going to be like fast-paced. It's not going to be like taking 20 minutes every time we do this, just the way we did just now. Okay? All right, let's see what the results look like. Boom, view results. Okay, save. Okay, share. How about that? No? Okay. This is super on the fly. Okay, hang on. Admin view. View results. Save. Okay, we'll get to that. So I have your responses. Everybody has responded. I can tell you that 52% of the people in the room have been to 0 GERN annual meetings, which is great. Welcome. London is 40% immigrants. Burning Man every year has a 40% turnover. Number of people who've never been to Burning Man every year is about 40%. 50's high. 50's high. It's a little bit over, but it's good to have something like that level of turnover to keep an institution fresh. It seems like, who is the other 4s? Is it only 3%, really? Wow, okay. And then, so we've got 3% have been to 4, 3% have been to 3, 21% have been to 2, and, someone just switched, and 18% to 1. Anyway, okay, so I'm glad that I added the 0 because it gives us that important missing data. What we're going to do today, last year was a lot about, last year's GERN Annual Meeting and GEC was about crowdsourcing ideas for entrepreneurs. And we were trying to use the experience of the GEC in South Africa to really listen to the entrepreneurial community. We did some great crowdsourcing exercises that were organized and hosted by the Kauffman Foundation that has a lot of expertise in this from their e-ship activities. And there were outputs from that, which we've shared on various GERN calls that informed our priority goals for this year. So that was a very valuable exercise. This year, in consultation with Sami Desai, who leads research activities at the Kauffman Foundation, and in our own internal discussions, we decided to take that another step to basically say, well, let's kind of crowdsource our own expert understanding. So we've all been doing this work for a pretty long time, some people on the research side, some people on the practitioner side, and we each have ideas as to what we think works in this world of supporting entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship. And we may have different reasons for believing those things. Maybe it's because we have personally been involved in programs of various types and we've just seen with our own eyes that something is effective, either at the moment or over time, or else we've seen compelling research, or I guess those would be the two primary ways I could imagine being the case, but no, there's others. So that's what we sent, that's the survey we sent out. That's what we're going to start out doing at 11:30, and we are going to catch up because it's 11:22. So we have, I'm going to stop talking in 60 seconds, and we're going to get to Victor and Kelly and Dane. But basically, most of the day is this unconference, and it starts with what works, and we're going to do a lot of polling on that, and we're going to share the results that we got from our previous polls, and then we're going to talk about gaps. So once we think there's what we think works, where are the gaps in research? What are the things we just don't know enough about systematically? Either we just don't have the data, we just haven't done the analysis properly, or we don't have the underlying models, maybe. And then that's certainly, I think, an open question as to whether we even have the underlying, models for understanding and explaining these phenomenon. And then in the afternoon, of course, what's missing and what we should be doing. But I want to make sure that we don't race ahead to the essentially agenda items, what we're doing. Let's try to have a thoughtful day on, what do we think works, what are the gaps, and then how we can work collaboratively to define some projects going forward. I think that's 60 seconds. Victor, where are you?
Here.
How'd you do that?
Yeah, it was fast.
Wow, damn, because you were not there 60 seconds ago. Alrighty, so you're up. Can we get, Victor, the slides? We can replace this with the first set of slides. And you can just introduce yourself and start talking about what you're going to talk about. Okay. And maybe about 6 minutes each for Victor, Kelly, and Dane. Can you do that? 6 minutes? Got the timer going?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm Victor Mulas from the World Bank. Working in a unit where our mandate is to look at firm capabilities, innovation and entrepreneurship, and I'm focusing on startup ecosystems. Our role is to look at what is the knowledge that is out there, identify the gaps in that knowledge, and try to work on that knowledge to inform policy making, because at the end what we look into is to inform our lending projects to support startup ecosystems. So we've been working with GERN in this startup ecosystem mapping project, which basically was trying to gather reliable data on the startup ecosystem, because we saw there is a big gap there. We didn't understand what policies would work and what was the impact of those policies and what were the gaps. So that is what we have been doing. So we've been collecting data on a standardized way, primarily on relations, mentorship, financing, support programs, but also on taxonomy of entrepreneurs. And with that data, we've been going ecosystem by ecosystem. We have 10 right now. They range from Dar es Salaam, very nascent, to New York, very advanced. And what we have been doing is trying to analyze different categories to inform our policy programs. So those are the categories you have. I'm going to give you some links so you can go through the reports. I'm not going to go into much detail, but we basically have been looking at investment, how does it work or doesn't, supporting infrastructure, primarily accelerators, incubators, boot camps, other kind of workshops, mentorship, and so on. Supporting infrastructure for the entrepreneurs is the soft one. The kind of skills and characteristics entrepreneurs have to understand if there is any impact there. And then one aspect, because this is looking at the ecosystem level, we look at the community and how the knowledge flows and the access to resources and talent, how the friction in each ecosystem is or not, so you can ease the chances of entrepreneurs to find that and have a productive startup. We can map all these through relationships, and then you can see a little bit visually the maturity of ecosystems and how this friction and that community works. You have the clusters that you can see. So basically what this is telling you, every dot is a startup. It is telling you if you enter in an ecosystem like Dar es Salaam and you are one of the startups on the fringes, it is very difficult for you to reach out the mentors or talent or investment possibilities, because you will never meet that cluster that exists. Dar es Salaam ecosystem is not working. It resembles the society there, which is if you are in the 1% that went to the very good universities, you have the relationships. Otherwise, you will not find that. You move to Medellin, and you can see there are a lot of clusters being formed and attracting more. That basically means in 2 or 3 meetups, you can get to those clusters and access those resources. If you go to a New York, I couldn't put it there because it's all black. So that's basically what you would see. Okay, so that's some of the results, and we can measure that with some network analysis measurements. The other thing that we are starting to look at is to measure how effective is supporting infrastructure, in this case is accelerators, because we can benchmark across ecosystems and we can understand what is the impact they are having in first getting startups to get funding, but more importantly, how do the startups get sustainable after the first funding? Because the first funding can come through a relationship with the accelerator and everything. So we know accelerators are very effective at this first getting funding. They usually, what we call that is creating quantity of startups. And that works very easily. You just need to put an accelerator regardless of the quality. You can see Cairo. It's a lot. It's a huge ratio that you're getting there. The problem is to make those startups sustainable, to get more than one founder investing on it, not the only one that you met, but something that you know is going to be more reliable. So you have to go to very developed ecosystems like New York to have a ratio above 1. And I can explain more the ratios later if you want to understand, but basically we were looking into the chances of getting funded if you went to an accelerator versus not going to an accelerator. And then you can see how effective are accelerators in getting the funding chances. So you go to New York and you can see that it's more important, they are very effective at creating sustainable startups, not so much as creating quantity. So you can see those effects and you can start pinpointing what do you need to improve the quality or not of the accelerators in your ecosystem and what is exactly what you have to target as a policy. The other thing we were looking at is in international knowledge and connection. How do you access that international knowledge? Because now knowledge flows are starting to become very fluid, and startups are a great conduit and a great tool to bring those knowledge to your entrepreneurs and your ecosystem. And that's something we start picking up when we mix this database, and you start seeing this is Santiago, this is Medellin, and you can see that there was a great connection with a cluster in Santiago de Chile through Startup Chile. So this is the same data with different visualizations, but it's very clear to you when you look at it and say, hey, how these guys are bringing a whole cluster into Medellin and that access to knowledge or mentorship of resources, right? And we went a little bit further, and we did that globally with all the 9 ecosystems that we have. And we don't have more, unfortunately, and we are missing big ones like Silicon Valley, but you can see a little bit of a proxy of what's going on here. The US attracts mostly everything. This is gravitational data. Every dot is a startup, again, and the colors are different ecosystems that you can see. So you can see right now in New York, it's probably the one that has more. It will happen in the US. But look at how Latin America get together and have the relationships of Singapore, and look at poor Africa and what happens there, right? So there is telling us that there are some knowledge flows that you can get, and there's an access. There are intermediators that are the connectors, and that's what we are studying right now to try to understand which tools we can use to access knowledge, investment, and resources internationally. I'm going to stop there. We have preliminary data. You have the links there. We can talk more later. Well, maybe not because I have to take a flight, but you can email me and we'll connect.
He has to take a flight. That's true. And you have to leave right now.
Yes.
You're leaving right now?
In 5 minutes.
Perfect. Okay, 5 minutes. He has 5 minutes. So since Victor has to leave, this isn't really our format, but since Victor has to leave, any questions that you'd like to bring to him real quickly? Urgent questions clarifying to what he just represented? Okay. Go ahead, Chris.
Sorry, Chris Haley Nesta. It may be more than a 30-second response, in which case let's follow up afterwards, but I'm particularly interested in your methodology for evaluating accelerators. So how are you doing that? What's your control group for that?
Yeah. So we can talk about that because we weren't following, this is not following random control groups or something like that. This is using the ecosystem data to validate their effectiveness based on the ecosystem results. So what we look into is, it's more, we look at the result because we are getting it in the data, which startups get the funding and the sustainable funding. And then we look at where the accelerators interacted with that versus when they did not. So basically, we are looking at those startups that were successful with an accelerator versus those ones that were successful with accelerator, and then we can start comparing. And I can send you the regressions and all the number crunching behind that so you can see it. But it doesn't follow an RCT. I mean, and it's not going program by program. So we don't know exactly, we don't know the causality, that's I can tell you, and we don't know exactly what makes some accelerators to be more successful than others. But what we know is when we aggregate in ecosystem base, we know that you as an ecosystem have a problem consistent, maybe not all of the programs, but you have a problem consistently, right? So then you have to find out which one it's particularly. We can discuss more and see how.
Okay, great. Well, thanks a lot for squeezing this in. Oh, one more question here, real quick.
Omar Abedi from Dirasat in Bahrain. In the graphs you put up, you treat connections as being unambiguously a good thing. In certain situations, connectivity might be bad because it might slow down someone who's trying to do a good job if they keep going, they're too connected to all the nodes. Is that something which is possible, or am I misunderstanding what the connections mean?
So the connections, basically, they are transactional connections in this case in terms of accessing knowledge or investment. So it's more about have you mentored or have you been mentored? Have you received investment or have you provided investment or any kind of other support from an accelerator, incubator, or other kind of skills program? So those are meaningful connections in this case. So I think they're productive connections, but we haven't looked into the positive or negative effects on those cases. It's more access to some knowledge or investment that you may have or not.
Okay. All right, we should move on.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Let's get out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry.
But thanks for squeezing this in. Really appreciate it. Kelly, 6 minutes for you.
Good morning. I am unprepared for this because I didn't know there were supposed to be slides. So
No, there aren't supposed to be slides, actually. There's only 2 exceptions. So it's okay. You can speak from without slides.
which would you prefer?
Without slides.
Without slides works for me.
Yeah.
One of the questions that people normally ask when talking about measuring the mindset of individuals is, why do we need another one? Aren't there lots? The answer is yes, there are lots. All you have to do is Google entrepreneurial test, and you'll get lots. One of the things that is different, however, is that most of the tests that you will find, with only a few exceptions, have 2 unfortunate characteristics. One of those unfortunate characteristics is there's no academically respectable data on the performance of those measures. The second unfortunate characteristic is a question that you will never get asked online is, are you a male or a female? Think about that for a second. All of these tests purport to measure entrepreneurial capability and ignore a major demographic characteristic that the entrepreneurship literature shows does make a difference. So what we've done is try to construct a test of entrepreneurial mindset that begins with a thorough review of the entrepreneurship literature to identify as many characteristics of behavior, thought processes, activities that are related to entrepreneurial success, not starting with, oh, let's see, well, we should measure locus of control, we should measure achievement motivation, we should, the standard 5 or 6 that come to anybody's mind. Well, the literature actually comes up with 76 different characteristics that are described, but if you look at those carefully, they really reduce down to 37 separate constructs. And what we've done is we've taken those 37 constructs, we have taken questions from publicly available scales where they were available, we have taken suggestions from scales and concepts where there are no scales published, although in many of those cases there would be an item or 2, which means you can use those 2 items, and you can easily create a couple more that look like the 2 that you just found. And then when there's nothing else to do, you write items. So we've done that too. And we measured the 37 constructs with a grand total of 116 items. Thanks to the Alan Gray Orbis Foundation, we were able to do this in South Africa with a pilot study to reduce the number of items from 116 down to 72. And then we tested the 72 on over 3,000 people in a nationally representative sample. The result is that we obtain 9 core dimensions for both men and women, although all of the items that, I thought I was supposed to be doing this without slides.
They told me to do it, so.
Great. So I've lost control of the presentation. This happens a lot to me. So I'll just pretend that there's nothing up there for you to look at and keep talking. What we did in both the pilot study and in the final study is factor analyze separately by sex. And the factor structures are different, and the numbers of items that fall into each dimension are identical for 2 of the 9 dimensions. They are different for the other 7 core dimensions. What we hope to do in the future is extend this sort of study to other nations who are interested in creating a national study of the entrepreneurial mindsets of their own populations. Why would you want to do that? Well, one reason is you'd like to know, maybe if you're a minister, how your country looks in comparison to others. Another reason you might want to know is that if you have programs that are hoping to change the behavior and effectiveness of nascent entrepreneurs, we can give you a place to start. And then you can do the programs and see what difference it makes, see what difference it makes comparing people who are in the program to the national sample that you have collected. So the possibilities are extensive, and we would be delighted to talk to anybody in much more detail than I have here.
That's incredible. Because if you subtract the 4 seconds when you were making the comment about the slide, that was exactly 6 minutes. So that's experience. All right, so thank you very much. And now, Dane, so to clarify about the slides, so we have 2 categories of presentations. We have the GERN Collaborative Research Projects, and then we have the reports. So we did ask for these short reports, no PowerPoints. It is true that we made a concession for the collaborative projects. We actually mostly do have slides. So that's you should set your expectations around that. Anything that's under a collaborative research project report back, there may be slides, but if we have only, I think only one exception for the report backs, where mostly we're just going to be doing it verbally. I mean, we're mostly just trying to have a discussion here and not presentations. But Dane and Startup Genome team have been doing an enormous amount of work on the report that they're releasing this afternoon. I think we're getting the first public preview. Is that correct? So this is all embargoed till this afternoon. No taking pictures of screenshots and posting them, nothing like that.
So I'm going to stand up here, since I do have slides, so you don't have to keep looking back and forth between me and the slides. Even
Thank you.
You do have to turn around for this. I apologize.
Yeah.
So as Phil mentioned, we're releasing our Global Startup Ecosystem Report today with the Global Entrepreneurship Network. It's actually already public on our website.
Oh, okay.
But we haven't promoted it yet. The kind of official launch and kickoff is at the afternoon/evening plenary with our CEO, JF, and with Jonathan. So that'll be kind of the official big launch, but it is technically publicly available. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it because I want you to read it, but also because I only have 6 minutes. So I just want to cover 3 things. I want to talk about very broadly our approach, I want to focus on a couple new factors that we've measured this year in this year's report, and then focus also on ways that I hope that we can collaborate together. So again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. You can read more about this in the report, but our general approach is we try to assess ecosystems according to an ecosystem lifecycle model. We have 10 success factors on which we assess startup ecosystems. You'll find 43 ecosystems that are profiled in the report. We collected data on about 100 cities or ecosystems worldwide, but what you see publicly in the report is only about 20% of the data that we assess and analyze. So there's a lot more underneath that you won't see in the report. You'll see a big analysis on technology subsectors in this year's report. And then we're also doing more work on policy analysis with a lot of our members and a lot of our partners. I want to emphasize, especially with this group and with GERN, because we are about collaboration, I want to highlight a couple things where we definitely want to share data and collaborate with you. I want to highlight in particular startup output. We have worked very, very, very hard over the past several years to try to get accurate estimates of just how many startups there are in a given city or a given region or a given ecosystem. This is a very straightforward number, but as many of you know, it is incredibly difficult to generate. And so using lots of different lists, lots of different cross-referencing and cross-checking, cleaning and checking websites, we think we've come up with some pretty accurate numbers for startup output that can be used as a denominator for your own research. That is definitely something we want to talk to you about using and collaborating, as well as with our ecosystem value, trying to estimate just the total monetary value of a given ecosystem. Again, working over many, many years and discarding lots of approaches, as I'm sure you can all appreciate, we think we've come to a pretty good estimate that we'd like to collaborate with you on. Similar to what Victor talked about, we have started to assess the effect of accelerator programs. In addition to funding, as Victor mentioned, we have some complementary findings both for individual startups, but also for the ecosystems themselves. To what extent do accelerators and does accelerator participation lead to greater global connectedness for a given ecosystem, or higher startup experience in addition to funding? So we look at that across all of our factors as well. And this is one thing where we very, very much want to collaborate and share data with all of you. Two of the new things that I mentioned, last year's report, we measured global connectedness for the first time. I appreciate the question about, connections. When are they good? When are they bad? When do you know if they mean something? So we try to hone in on those connections between people that are not just, I know you on LinkedIn, I forgot your name 6 months later, I collected your business card, and now I have no idea who this is, but actually significant, meaningful relationships. I can call you, I can email you, and we can help each other, we can exchange knowledge. Last year we tried to measure that at the global level. This year we measured local connectedness for the first time. All of our cities and regions have lots of events and activities going on. To what extent is a business plan competition, is an accelerator, is a bar crawl, is a networking event contributing to both startup success and ecosystem performance? So that's what we measured and captured this year. And then similar to what Kelly was talking about, we have a new factor this year on founder mindset. And exactly as Kelly said, not personality, not the big 5 personality traits, but the behaviors, the attitudes, and the preferences that importantly, as I know Kelly would stress, are malleable, that are not fixed, and can even differ in our own personal and work lives. So we try to capture that and how those relate to both individual startup success, but also ecosystem performance. As I know I'm getting probably close to my time, I'll use my last minute for promotion. Again, we're launching the report this afternoon/evening. My colleague JF will be giving the presentation tomorrow. My colleague Arnobio will be giving the presentation also tomorrow related to the report. And then please do go read and download the report. And most importantly, please give us your feedback. We're always looking to improve on everything we do in the spirit of a research community. So please do not hesitate to contact us with your feedback. Thank you. Thank you.
Since I now know that 50% of people in this room have not been to a GERN annual meeting, some of you may know Dane and Arnobio previously, but I can say from experience, these are not people with a thick skin. These are not sensitive people. These are people who are scholars and learners. And so I would suggest that you do download the report. And I would suggest that while they're here, that you do seek them out, particularly if you're not happy with it. I mean, if you think that this is not the way to look at these topics, seek them out and tell them why, because they're serious about doing this work and they want to improve it. So, of course, if you love it, that's fine, but don't just tell them you love it for the sake of telling them you love it, okay? Now, since we've caught up a little bit, I'm going to take 2 minutes to explain what you just heard. What does this mean, GERN Collaborative Research Projects? This is a network. In our first meeting in Moscow, what we did was we had a smaller group of people. It was just around a table, and it was the funding organizations, the organizations that fund research on entrepreneurship. Those are the GERN members. And the GERN member organizations had pre-submitted a 2-page statement of what they plan to do absent GERN in the coming 24 months. And then we had those as inputs, so there was a binder of all those inputs. Then we went around the room, people explained what they were already planning to do. And then we tried to figure out where there were sort of bins of activities, where it seemed as though we already had momentum around certain topics. And by the end of that day, we defined some collaborative areas of work. One of the ones we left off the table was mindset. Although there was quite a bit of interest in mindset, we agreed that the research was too weak. There was too much mediocre stuff, as Kelly pointed out, too little discipline and too little prospect of making a contribution. So we put that to the side, but we had other areas that we included. Anyway, I'm not going to rehash what happened over 4 years, but the point is that what that did was a set a precedent of GERN. We have no building. We have no research staff. We don't put out our own white papers. GERN itself does not perform any research at all, and it's never the intention that it will. That's not why we're here. What we're trying to do is facilitate and connect and amplify the best of what's out there, focus research, align, and just make sure that we do more useful work together. We're not trying to add another entity because we have lots of research entities that are already out there. But we do try to, as with the World Bank project, and as with Startup Genome, as with the Mindset Study, we do try to have our brand, our contribution, our convening power, in some cases, a kind of catalytic, maybe intellectual role, that either I or somebody else who's part of our network, contributes, where we feel like we've really made a value add, that we do try to sort of define it as a GERN collaborative project. So to us, these projects are very special projects because these are all driven. I mean, this is Kelly's work, this is Dane's work, and the Startup Genome work, and of course it's Victor's work, but it's also work that they've done with us, that they identify as being GERN work, and then we kind of grow this sort of shared research space. So I don't know if there's any questions about that in terms of what we're hearing today under the topic GERN collaborative research projects. That's basically what you're hearing. And we have about 6 areas that we're now working in. I don't actually feel like running through them, but I'll get to them later on. Okay? Yep.
So we're here representing Bahrain, who are going to be the next.
Yes, the host. Yes, yeah, we're excited about that.
And very interested in the research that Kelly just mentioned. We'd be very interested in doing something similar in Bahrain in advance of next year. Is this something which has been done in any Arab country to the best of your knowledge, or can we be the first?
To some degree, this has been done in other places. The U.S. panel studies of entrepreneurial dynamics have followed people for their PSED1 followed people for 4 years, PSED2 followed people for 6 years. There are PSED studies in 8 other countries, but there is no, most of the other PSED studies have almost no psychological measures in them, so that in terms of pure measure of psychological characteristics, attitudes, behaviors, and preferences, this is really, well, all right. Shameless self-promotion, it's the gold standard.
We will be getting in touch with you, hopefully, too.
Yeah, and I'll just independently validate that. Well before I met Kelly, I was, as Zoltan Ach, who's here, we're familiar with Paul Reynolds and other folks who were involved in the PSED studies, and those are really unambiguously the best studies of their type in the United States. So Kelly's building on that legacy and that learning. And I guess, thank you for that question, because although I did want to save for the next round of GERN collaborative projects as we get more towards action, that's why I wanted to lay out basically what the collaborative projects are. So I'm going to try to keep you in suspense on that a little bit still. But the idea is basically that these collaborative projects are modularized. So any member country or organization that has sort of $50,000 to $100,000 either for the network mapping that Victor was talking about, or for the entrepreneurial mindset project, can basically do an implementation of this. So it's all within countries, self-funded. There's no money that comes to GERN. There may be money that comes to Kelly and his team to the extent that they're doing work and not just sharing kind of their knowledge and understanding. But it's not like we intermediate any of this. It's just that basically any organization that would like to bring these projects to their country, and of course the more places in which we can do this work that the Alan Gray Orbis Foundation has taken a really serious leadership role in creating for South Africa, the more learning we're going to have in the aggregate. And it's the same thing with the, of course, it's the same thing with the entrepreneurial ecosystem mapping projects. Our aspiration when we were in Moscow was we were going to do 100 cities in 5 years. We're in now year 4, but the project didn't really launch for a year after that. So I think we have two more years from the project launch to get to that. Mars Data Catalyst was the first collaborator along with Nesta. So Nesta and Mars were the first to do London and Toronto. I think we're up to 40 now, so we probably have to work pretty hard to get the next 60 in 2 years. It's not inconceivable, but 100 in 5 years seemed like it was a reach goal, and the fact that we've done 40 in 3 years, I think, is pretty good on the ecosystem mapping project. So, anyway, that's what we do with the collaborative projects. Any questions about that before we get to the next part of this? If we could switch back to the Slido, please. Yeah, switch back to the Slido. Okay. Questions about that? No? Okay, that's always that. Was it so mystifying and okay, yeah.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, I mean,
it's not really about the nature of the collaborative project. It's more about like the project of Kelly.
that's okay. You can ask Kelly questions. He's still here.
Yeah.
I have questions for Kelly or Dane. That's fine. That's
No,
welcome.
so
yeah.
for the mindset, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Marco Marchese from the OCD, and well, I mean, I think you will know all the work that is part of the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, and different that measures sort of like entrepreneurial attitudes across country, and also we think that there are like some issues with the methodology and the quality of the data. I think what is important in this case, especially if you look at variation over time, is like to see like how much really like the mindset and the attitudes change over time, because these are supposed to be factors which change over like a long period of time. You say like cultural things, the culture is difficult to change. It's not something that changes rapidly. But what we see, for example, with GEM, when we look at GEM data for our analysis, is that sometimes you have like big variation in attitudes even within a span of like 5-6 years, and that's not very very credible, in the sense that. And also another thing is to look at correlation with the birth rate, with the startup rate. Very often there is very little correlation between attitudes, even when they are positive, and startup rates. It's completely a mess. There is no correlation whatsoever, whereas you would think that if a country has positive attitudes to entrepreneurship, we would also find higher startup rates, but that's not the case. So that's like two kind of like puzzling issues that as consumer of data, I mean, we're not responsible for GEM data within the OECD, but it's something that we're puzzled, and that for the reason you mentioned, we are also skeptical about the quality of this data, and a bit hesitant to use it for our policy analysis. So that's two things.
I'm not sure I heard a question.
It wasn't a question, just like a comment, if
Well,
I'm allowed.
I can make a comment in return, and the one thing that I would say is that thanks to AGOF, what we were able to do in South Africa was a nationally representative sample of people. And that typically does not happen in the GEM work. The GEM work is kind of who we can find. And so there is a great deal more variability from year to year in the GEM reports than you would expect from one nationally representative sample to a comparable nationally representative sample in another year. Now, one of the reasons that the PSED is so highly regarded is that the same people, the identical people, were followed for 4 years, and then in PSED2 followed for 6 years. That turns out to be ridiculously expensive, but has provided data that are you can't get them anywhere else. And so you can be really confident of the quality of those data, but it really turns out that if you have national teams raising different amounts of money, operating according to a general structure specified by the GEM folks, but only a general structure, and not doing studies that are nationally representative, complete with weights, then you're going to get more variation than you would get by using a single source that did the same thing every time, every place.
Any other questions? Whatever. Still win. Okay, well then let's move on to the next thing. So, so if you still have your phones or computers or whatever, and you can think about your answer to this question that we posed, and I'll phrase it exactly as we did in the to the online poll. So what we said was, what works? Please share at least one example of a program or policy that you have high confidence is effective in supporting entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship. And what we did online was we asked for a confidence level, and we gave 5 options. Absolutely certain, very confident, 60% confidence and above, moderately confident, 30 to 60% confidence, not very confident, 30% confidence or less, not confident at all. So we didn't have any not confident at all because presumably everybody's confident to some degree, because that's the whole point of the question. But it would be, if you want to have some, just a percentage, we're just, you know, ballparking. This is just a rough sense of basically how strongly you feel about this. But you can go to Slido, go to the questions part. So there's questions and poll. We're going to do this as a question, although it's actually not a question, it's a statement, but that's okay. Slido doesn't know that, it's okay. But if we do it as a question, it allows you to upvote. So if you like the question, or if you like the contribution, then you can actually agree with somebody else's, okay? So we can try this out. We do have one person who posted, "How are you?" as a question, which is great, so somebody knows how to do this. And so we're going to keep that up there, even though it's not a response. As the administrator, I can hide things, so I can sort of clean things up as we go. If you submit silly things, they're going to disappear. But you know, we are trying to, you know, be serious, because we're researchers, we're serious people. So anyway, do you understand what you're trying to do here? You think about it first, because you're not going to put 15 things down. There's only going to be a few things in your experience that you feel like you really have confidence are effective in this space. If you have 15, then I'm impressed. I don't think there are that many in the work that we do. Okay? So this is quiet work. What's a statement? A statement. This is an answer to the question, what works? So although I'm going to say it again. So you're answering this question. What you type into the Slido box, where it says questions, you're not typing a question. This is the main thing you need to understand. that you're going to just type an answer to the question I'm asking right now. The question is, what works? And the clarification is, please share at least one example of a program or policy that you have high confidence is effective in supporting entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship. So say what the program or policy is, say afterward what your level of confidence is, and then anything after that you want to say is fine, but don't make it a whole essay, just like a couple of sentences. Okay? Can you do that? 2 minutes. I'm putting on a timer, 2 minutes, quiet work. I did teach elementary school for 2 years, so when I say like I want to see quiet work for 2 minutes, you know. I know. I want you to be quiet.
Reducing business relations. Support entrepreneurs for sure.
I mean, I sort of need my computer, but. Here, hold on a second.
It's fine. We'll make a joke. We will make a joke for sure. So I speak Italian actually, beyond buongiorno. Siciliano.
Okay, so you should, I would prefer to have it up on the display, but their internet is not working, so my internet's working, but theirs isn't. I don't have an answer for that. So if you, since you've been entering them, you can now scroll through. It's easier if we can all look at it together up there, but it's not essential. So you can scroll through and see what people have responded. Okay, so now if you could take a minute to go through, yeah, we're starting to see some upvotes. So again, we have some actual time budgeted for this. We're not in a huge rush. So read through them 2 or 3 times. There's a bunch of options here. And then really think about which ones you want to upvote. You know, just be a little disciplined with your upvotes. It's all anonymous. I can't enforce anything here. So, you know, but just pick 2, 3 that you feel like, yes, that was something that you didn't submit, but you feel pretty good about. And try not to be influenced by what other people have upvoted. In fact, I'm going to remove.
Sorry, can you repeat again?
Oh, you better leave Tower.
If you, yeah, exactly. So if you like it, then you click where it says thumbs up next to it. But don't click on every one. Pick 3 or 4, I said 2 or 3, 3 or 4, just try to be disciplined about it. Don't go crazy. Try not to go crazy. I'm looking around, I think some people are going crazy, actually.
Can you tell on their faces?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. This is kind of incredible. Everybody has internet. Okay. That's it.
Phil, can we ask a process question?
Yes.
So there are a few general themes where multiple people have given similar responses.
Right, good point.
Are you going to cluster them? Because if not, the effect would be to kind of dilute the upvotes.
That's a good point. It's a good point. So why don't we talk, because I can edit them and we can consolidate them. I think that'll be a good group exercise. So why don't we make that an exception to the 3 or 4? If there are basically ones you feel are kind of the same, you can upvote all of them so that we lift them all up together, and then we'll consolidate them, once we've kind of taken a look at the results. Okay? And you can also feel free as you do this to add additional ones. If something comes to mind, you feel like there's a gap, right? And then we're going to spend some time, I think that may be the first thing we do. By the way, we've never done this, so it's not like I have some way. This isn't like some dog and pony show that I do this. We're just learning how to do it together. Okay? They better behave, exactly. Yeah. I'm also trying to, we're now resorting to them getting Wi-Fi on my phone, so. I have to say, to be very fair, we were counseled against this activity because of connectivity issues. But since I've had perfectly fine connectivity in the hotel, I just sort of said, well, let's just try it anyway. So I really cannot blame the technical crew because they warned us. So, but I think it's working within the room, and you can see the results on your phone, so it just can't display for the time being. Okay.
If I may.
Yes, please do.
My internet stopped working and I forgot the network and then went back and added it new.
And
it came
was
back.
fine.
So
Yeah.
if you have that problem.
If anybody has that problem, that's always a good idea, delete the network and let it kind of refigure itself out. Always a good approach. Okay, so I'm now going to resort it according to upvotes. So, how are you? Still second. But, yeah. No,
We're also serious at the end.
Exactly, right. Okay. I've already upvoted. But at least we have one. Omar, thank you, because we have one that beats how are you. which is mentoring programs. Very confident. You have a few at once, so we could break these down. Might have to break them down later on. Prizes for entrepreneurship confident. Programs that make people respect entrepreneurs by altering cultural values. So that's a good set. And overall, that package has the most upvotes. I also see just a couple of people were willing to reveal their identities. You guys are a very cagey bunch. Super cagey bunch. Wow. Yeah, okay, let's not overcommit. Okay. So I think we can separate making people respect entrepreneurs by altering cultural values from encouraging entrepreneurial mindset. I think those would be different. Any discussion of that? Because what we're going to do is I'm going to translate this into a poll, right? We're going to break these down into a poll, and we're going to redo the vote, right? We're going to redo the vote after we've distilled these into a set of categories. So we crowdsource, we structure, and then we reevaluate, okay? So we want to come up with some kind of consensus as to what we really think works, but we want to start pretty broadly with a bunch of suggestions, okay? At least that's what we're doing as of 30 seconds ago. Yes.
Sorry, Lou from Nesta. I guess my question is also, when we say what works, what exactly are we getting at? So I was looking at one of the really interesting ones, I find personally, is adding entrepreneurship to school education. So I think that's a really interesting one. It's something that we at Nesta are also funding. But I guess there's a question on, is that going to encourage entrepreneurship? But that also there's a question around, is that going to encourage people or adults that are more innovative, more entrepreneurial, even if that's within a company? And is that something we should want? I mean, I think the answer is yes. But,
well, hold on.
Is that...
Hold on. So say that same thing, but just more slowly.
Okay,
so how do you think, that particular one, what would be some different ways of interpreting what works?
Right, so I think there's a question around what we care about as a group today. And it seems to me entrepreneurship is obviously the main thing that everyone here cares about. But there are also different factors of success that could be attributed to some of these different interventions. So when I'm thinking about the one on school curriculum having entrepreneurship included in it, I'm thinking, yes, it might mean that a lot of youngsters turn out to be entrepreneurs later on, and that's fantastic. But it could also mean that some of the individuals that go through those entrepreneurship curriculums end up being a lot more entrepreneurial within their jobs. So turning into, really, really great employees who have fantastic, innovative ideas, which in turn mean that those companies do a lot better. So I guess my question is, are we only looking at what works in terms of entrepreneurship today, or are we also trying to think about what works more generally?
Okay, so that's a really, really good question. And part of the reason we have 2 rounds of voting, because we're just going to upvote to distill, but then, we may be thinking about it differently the second time around. So let's spend a few minutes on this very important question, okay? Since this is a global entrepreneurship research network, how much do we care about entrepreneurial outcomes as defined by the creation and growth of a firm? And how much do we care about outcomes that are related to entrepreneurship, including entrepreneurial mindset, entrepreneurial behavior, and whatever else you want to add to that list? So when we're, as a network, looking at program effectiveness, how should we think about those questions? Thoughts, comments, particularly anybody who hasn't had a chance to say anything, which is most people?
Can I just maybe?
Yes, please.
So, I've done a lot of research on the future of work in the past, and I completely agree that in that sense it's important to have this as a school curriculum, because I think when I think about entrepreneurial mindset, I think it's not just important that we make everybody into an entrepreneur in terms of having their own startup, but I think it will become, in the future, it will become really important for people to have an entrepreneurial mindset as an employee as well, because people will have more disrupted life cycles and work lives, and they need to have this mindset to navigate through their work life. And I think it's from a public policy standpoint, it's really important to think about how do I equip the workforce of tomorrow to be successful in a more disrupted work life that through technology. And so this is one of our core research areas right now as well. So I think from that perspective, I think it's really an important question.
Okay, that's a great observation. Anybody else?
I would make one observation about measuring potential outcomes, and I think that we should also examine the variance inherent in the outcomes. I know that a lot of people who teach entrepreneurship are happy to say, I get two kinds of outcomes in my class. Either I get people who say, oh yeah, that's really cool, and I've learned enough, I really want to do this. Or we get people who say, there's a lot more work than I thought it was. I'm just going to take a job. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I consider either one of those to be a success. In the second case, the success kind of needs to be explained. And so by way of explanation, I would say, well, somebody who has that attitude is not going to start a company that will fail and lose a lot of money that could have been invested in a company that will succeed. So I think that there are societal issues on both ends, and I think it's important to pay attention to the variance in the answers.
Okay. Anybody else from this side of the room? I didn't actually, nobody on this side of the room is prohibited from speaking. Even Zoltan hasn't said anything. Okay, okay. Yeah, this is crazy. They'll come in later on. They'll swoop down on us like, like hawks. We're just little mice, and they're going to come down later on and just get us. I've been on enough calls with them. I know how it goes. All right. So,
Maybe just a little
interjection, because we're going to close this. We're going to come to a resolution. I'm going to, as the chair, I'm going to impose a resolution on this. Well, Victor has something. Victor, why are you sitting back there anyway? Oh, okay. All right. Well, can we get a mic to Victor? Okay. All right.
One question I think it'd be worth defining about our target, which is, are we targeting the entrepreneur's improvement in our zone of focus area, or are we looking at the extended effects in the system? So for instance, if you have a contest for entrepreneurs and those entrepreneurs win, if you look at those entrepreneurs, you can say they got a lot of benefit out of being part of that program. What we don't measure is the entrepreneurs who lose that contest and the negative effects it has on those. If you talk to people who've lost these contests, they'll tell you how detrimental it is to their work. They feel deflated. Some of them get out of it after they lose. They feel like it's unfair. And I don't know if we tend to, we get skewed by what we look at. And so if the microscope looks at the entrepreneurs that we're helping without looking at the system, then we're missing the system effect. So I think that's the question to consider is, who are we actually looking at, and what's our unit of analysis?
And not that winning the contest is always the best thing that you can do for them. So.
Right. Those are separate questions, right?
So it's off my laptop, so I'm going to have to go back and forth. But so that's a really great point. So that's the second dimension, or I guess a third dimension we can add on. So there's obviously the creation and growth of firms is a really good thing. If we're interested in entrepreneurship, that's a really good thing. And we can extend that. But basically, whatever we're talking about is traditionally defined entrepreneurial outcomes. Then there is the capacity to work entrepreneurially. And that's also very important. And then there's what the impact of entrepreneurial programs are, plus or minus, in the broader system, right? To people who are outside of the affected programs, but are affected by the entrepreneurs, and also when we have programs looking at not just what happened to the people who say we're the awardees, but the people who did not. So what I would say, and there's a way to discipline this, which is the way that our broader network is organized. The Global Entrepreneurship Network has already made a decision about this, which is it's all of these things. So if we are the research arm of the Global Entrepreneurship Network, then we really have no choice but to be about all of these things. Because that's what our the entrepreneurs and the organizations supporting entrepreneurs, you know, K-12, pre-K, all the way up, you know, to, you know, 118. I mean, you know, human lifespans are expended. Everybody is part of it. And every dimension of entrepreneurial outcome is something that we have to take seriously and study. It doesn't mean we spend equal time on all of them. Okay? Which means that when we think about what works, we have to think about it contextually. We have to think about it in terms of intent and scope that's reasonable for that program. I think it's very unreasonable to think about a pre-kindergarten program being assessed in terms of how many high-growth firms it generated, right? It's just not the right way to think about it. This is just, I mean, anyway, pre-kindergartners are entrepreneurial anyway, so we don't, so what is that even about? But just what's relevant to that program, what's the scope that makes sense for that activity, and then we think about it in that way in a fairly fluid manner. Okay? Is there any disagreement with that consensus decision? I don't think that I heard anything that was in disagreement with that. Okay, so now this is back up there. I'm going to stand back here because this is what I have to do. All right, so mindset, this is really awkward. Learning by doing. Learning by doing. Learning by doing. So who, come on, reveal yourself. Okay, thank you. Good, so explain to us exactly what you mean, and particularly how it's a program or policy.
So it was programmatic. It was related to the curriculum one, which was also part of what I wrote. And it's with regards to this not entrepreneurial learning not being a theoretical exercise. Yep. So it was about it being practical and relevant, and ensuring that it's based in activities that make sense to that particular context or situation. So learning by doing could go beyond. So the reason I separated it from curriculum was that it could go beyond the school, and just be in the way that we actually work with startup entrepreneurs when we're talking about particular aspects of entrepreneurship, that it's activity-based, that we're not, often what we find in South Africa is there's a lot of people who are teaching entrepreneurship or teaching business that actually haven't applied that. And so it becomes difficult for entrepreneurs to actually relate to what is being taught. So that's what it meant.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, any comments about learning by doing? Ken, I know you have comments about this. Do you believe that we should be teaching entrepreneurship in a classroom from a textbook from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., sending people home, or do you believe that people should have some ability to practice whatever it is the domain of entrepreneurship? Right, but unpack a little bit. Unpack what learning by doing actually, lean forward and turn your mic on. So unpack from your standpoint, because I know you've had a lot of experience with this, since we all agree that it's been upvoted, we agree this is important. But now, how does this become a program? How do you actually make it real? Particularly like K-12, I mean, is it just lemonade stands? What does it mean to make this a real activity?
Well, I mean, we put people in peer cohorts and just measure data outcomes. We're essentially buying data results with breakfast burritos. You know, we prefer scientists and the creative class, to borrow from Richard Florida, as opposed to the business students, you know? So business programs typically have entrepreneurship initiatives and programs, and we found it's a lot harder to teach undergraduate business kid who doesn't have a good business idea how to be an entrepreneur, as opposed to taking somebody who's in the hard sciences or somebody who's a designer and say, hey, you have all these other projects you're working on, and here's a little bit of business ideas. You're actually an entrepreneur. Here's what that looks like. So.
Okay, yeah, Omar. Why don't could you join? We have a lot of empty spaces. Just come on up. Yeah, we got 2 comments. Go ahead. Omar, just sit right here. Because Victor left, or sit in Victor's spot. Okay, yeah, you're not Victor.
So entrepreneurship involves many steps. One of the steps which we do teach both as a learning by doing and in a structured way is the academic side of entrepreneurship. So anyone who's doing a PhD is by definition having to do some sort of research which is unprecedented in pushing the boundary, which is one part of the entrepreneurial production function. And so that's an example of structured learning by doing for one piece of the entrepreneurship puzzle. And then we also see it sometimes in, lower down high schools when you have competitions for who can come up with the best invention. That's one aspect, more the intellectual aspect. But as for the sort of, and when I was a kid, we also had there was a website which was virtualstockexchange.com, which was an opportunity for people for free to see if they could be the next, Warren Buffett. But as I say, these are only components. I don't know if there's a way to easily do the entirety of the entrepreneurship production team, but you can definitely tackle certain components in a structured learning. And I absolutely agree that learning by doing is a very, very effective way of exposing people to the process.
Great. So I'm going to be wandering back and forth because I've got to keep this scrolling up. But just to stay on this one, so I also completely agree with this. I would say that, at least in my experience with this type of work, there are three, there could be plenty more, but three categories of things that come to mind. First is get out of the building sort of thing. Now, when people who aren't in an academic setting, hear that, they're like, what building? What are you talking about? What is the building? But we know what building we're talking about. We're talking about, the on-campus building. So, and I learned this. I teach a social entrepreneurship course, and the 1 year I decided, actually, 3 weeks into the semester, I decided, we really need to do customer discovery in this class. We need to do some design thinking. And so I'm going to challenge my students to go out and take their very nascent concept and just start to ask people, about their needs. By week 7, and this is like there were 12 students in the class, small class, only 4 of them had done it. Because I just assumed they could do it. I just assumed they would just do it. I told them to do it, and they would do it. And they didn't do it. They couldn't, they wouldn't. There was no structure. And anyway, it was a pretty significant failure. So the next time I understood how much support, we were going to have to practice in class. We're going to have to interview each other. Then they were have to go in the hallway, interview some students about just dumb stuff, like what kind of food they like, just dumb stuff. Just get in the practice of asking anybody about anything. And only after a lot of practice were they going to be able to have one relevant conversation with just a single person about their concept to see if anybody would ever want the thing that supposedly was a great idea. And so that was a real learning to me, just how much, and of course they got a lot out of it, but it just took a lot of work. So that would be one. And then another one is, skin in the game. And that these virtual stock markets, but some kind of skin in the game where they, you might have to spend $50 on something. It might happen. And they're students and they don't like that. But if it's something you really want to build, at some point or another, it will cost you some money, even as a student. But there's just a couple of things. So I think that this is about defining what we mean by that. I'm just trying to get some clarity on what learning by doing is for me. I mean, you understood it, posted it. But I think that when we think about learning by doing, it's all these dimensions of how you can not just simulate, but give an experience of entrepreneurial practice that is visceral and that people do not forget and that they grow from. So I think...
Can I be provocative, Phil? So I was going to say, being researchers, we tend to look to universities for a lot of good practice. I would say, though, actually, in my view, the rise of accelerators in the past decade has been largely because of the abject failure of universities to provide practical, hands-on, short courses that entrepreneurs actually want. So I think if we want to look at actually what practical support looks like, we should not just be looking at the universities, but also looking at accelerators and how they're working and trying to abstract good practice from them.
Go ahead.
I just want to support these things that learning by doing is really key. And so we have a proof in our program, which is called Emprotec at UNCTAD. which is done by UN since 30 years. We're celebrating 30th anniversary here. And this is really key, especially when we talk about teaching of adult population, which is normally, you know, target group in our program, although we also have students as well. But, you know, the key is that they have already some experience or they are part of the group, which is dominated by entrepreneurship experience as a collective experience. And it's really also very important that this learning by doing is relevant to them. Because in our classes, I mean, it's a 6-day course, but it's very intense. Normally we say 24 hours. So it's a short course, but it's very intense. Some participants say that they equal it like to 12 months or even longer. So, so they do this learning based on their business that they develop during the 6 days. And so our you know, inspiration is that the impact of this course is really very basically, you know, amazing. Because we have, in some countries where they measure impact, survival rate of those who took the course sometimes twice higher than on average in the country. Recently we had also a survey of graduates of the Emperor course in Saudi Arabia, and there we had the indicator of job creation, which was 6 times higher than on average in the country within this group that took the course. So just another proof, and I completely agree that this is really key for entrepreneurship training. Thank you.
All right, so it's
Phil,
yeah,
can
go ahead. Yeah, Dane, okay, we got two.
He was actually first.
You're first, and then Dane, and then we're going to transition because we do want to, wow. That's scary. Okay, so we're going to, just after these two comments, we're going to be a little bit over for breaking for lunch, but that's scary. So I will consolidate all these. I'm going to, during the lunch break, I'm going to consolidate all these, and I'm going to get the poll. We're going to do all this stuff. We're going to run through. You're going to go, Lamia?
Actually, she's gone. It's me.
But she's gone?
She had to leave. She had to leave at 12:30. So it was the person next to me.
Oh, she's gone?
Yeah,
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, that's too bad. 12:30 was just, oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
going to do it.
Okay, it's cool. All right, but we're going to do that. We're going to do that in the next set. We're not going to do it in this set. Because I know you guys have it. And then we're going to run through, you know, yeah, we're going to run through this. Okay, so go ahead. You're up.
Oh, thank you so much. I don't think we should be struggling while we have some experiences like me and how we already have our own things going. So learning by doing, I'll start by speaking. Is it too late to create an entrepreneur? Or do we want to focus on 20 to 30 years entrepreneurs, or can we start from 16 by creating an entrepreneur? We have been doing that in my country where we have entrepreneurship clubs in high schools. So students not only learn entrepreneurship theoretically, but they put it in practice. We have a user manual we call From Ideas to Action. So we teach students how they can start pitching in their ideas, how they can think of creative ideas at an early age. So that when they when they finish, graduate from high school or go to universities, they already know what starting a business means. So they already know the experience of starting and running a business. So what we've been doing with these particular kids, not as what he mentioned about, saying that they don't have good business ideas. We have seen good business ideas, and some of who we support, they really thrive. They have great ideas, and when they put it into practice, they really thrive and they make a really good impact. So it's not picturing or targeting the older age, but we can start an early age from 16, because that's the year we're targeting, from 16 to 35. So we believe in empowering an entrepreneur at an early age. I think that's the main core essence of building an entrepreneur.
Right. Well, and I said the thing I did about pre-kindergarten, but at least one organization, Ashoka, social entrepreneurship organization, they have really made an extreme commitment to the teenage years in particular as the formative years for developing an entrepreneurial mindset, and Alan Gray Obrist as well. So you know, Dane, I want to let you go, and then you'll be up, and then we'll keep moving.
Yeah, I don't want to let Chris's provocation go by without comment, because I think he's probably right.
He's 100% right. That's why there's nothing to disagree
with. The logical extreme
with.
of that is just replace all university courses with like a startup weekend and see what happens.
Yeah.
But the one thing about Chris's comment is that it hasn't stopped universities from continuing to do this. Instead of what they've done is just said, oh, accelerators, we'll create them too. It hasn't stopped the growth of this.
I mean, I know I'm the one who moved us in the wrong direction with my personal anecdote, but I'm going on leave from George Mason. I don't even for a second think that the best university, even some significant fraction of relevant education and entrepreneurship happens in universities. So, but the question, what was up there was learning by doing. It wasn't universities. I just brought up an anecdote. So
then the question is, what's going to eventually get universities to either do something different or to stop? If everyone agrees that they're not good at it.
We just walk away and ignore that. I mean, what's up here is
keeps growing.
What's up here is learning by doing. So what we need to do is distill these. But what's not up here is university programs and entrepreneurship. At least that's not what I saw there. So we just want to discipline this, but yeah, that's a separate question about maybe what's missing. I mean, how you treat cancer is a different story. Okay, I lost myself too, but okay. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Zoltan, quickly, and then there's some people.
I just got a tiny question.
Yeah.
Is learning by doing the same as experiential learning, or are those different, or are we just using the same term for different things?
For the purposes of this discussion, with the error bars we're talking about, it's the same thing.
Then why don't we use experiential learning, which is like what is used in education, as opposed to learning by doing?
Well, it's an economics term or the...
Or the what? What's the other one?
I don't know. Education term.
The education. Well, and the reason that's important is there's a lot of stuff in experiential learning at the universities and everywhere else.
Well, since we're talking about research, our friend and colleague, Jim Besson at Boston University, has written a book titled Learning by Doing that is a very important book on research in entrepreneurship and on the future of work. And it is on exactly this topic of the importance. I'm going to go in and summarize that. We could talk about it offline. But if you're interested in what we've just been talking about, and you're interested in the data, and also Chris's point about why, under what circumstances we should think that there is enough codification of knowledge to permit the creation of a course, as opposed to not, particularly in new technology domains. Jim's book, just simply titled Learning by Doing, is terrific on that. Okay, so there are a number of others up here. I think that we've got enough structure on that we can we understand what that's about. Peer learning and mentoring, I'm just going to make an assertion that's different from, mentorship when we talked about it earlier in terms of.
Yes. Sorry, that's also mine.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to make the distinction that I think with mentorship, we normally think of this, similar to the sage on the stage kind of idea,
right,
that there's a particular person that holds the knowledge.
Yep.
And so this specifically refers to entrepreneurs or peers, basically guiding, assisting, advising, mentoring each other through a problem, because that has benefits for both the mentee and the mentor. Yeah.
That's great. And how are you doing? How are you has dropped to number 5 now. So we've really got some we've got some good competitors. All right. So we're going to hear from OECD in our next set, so that they have a chance to really present their slides. Yogaveli, we've heard a couple of things, and we also heard about the Mindset project. But would you like to add anything more about your perspective on what works?
So are we going on to the next?
No, but this is actually still within this domain. Basically, we combined the what works session with a little bit of a quick report back, because we don't want to get into like a whole, like this is what our organization does and stuff like that, and go to our website and everything like that. So this is really just supposed to be a targeted kind of from the perspective of, say, Nesta or Alan Gray Orbis. This is our answer to that question. Okay? So in the past, I should just say in the past, we started the GERN Annual Meeting with going around the room and everybody say where they're from and what they do. It takes like 2 hours. It's so boring. So I just couldn't really do that again. So it means you have to meet each other. But I hope you'll get to know each other through your comments. And that's why I want everybody to make a comment so we can at least kind of, in the afternoon, get a sense for who's in the room. But we're not going to each stand up and say where we're from and what we're doing, because it's just too long.
So I do have something to add. I don't think we have answers as much as more questions, in a sense. With the entrepreneurial mindsets research that we did, the next steps, as Kelly mentioned, is to benchmark it against other countries, or to encourage other countries to actually do it, so that we could develop a global benchmarking system, if that's beneficial, or just for each country to understand what the entrepreneurial mindsets looks like in their space. But I think it's also would be interesting to benchmark it against people who actually have become entrepreneurs. So if we're saying these are people who aren't entrepreneurs, these are the traits that have come through in the general population, what would that look like against people who've actually become successful entrepreneurs? And then I am interested in, especially with the history of the country that I'm from, is understanding the psychology of entrepreneurs against historical or contextual factors. How does the history of a country, so like apartheid in South Africa, how does that actually impact on the psychology of young people becoming entrepreneurs or not becoming entrepreneurs? And then just very quickly, internally in the foundation, we're assessing and trying to get research that looks at a tool that almost could predict for entrepreneurial behavior in a young person. So the way that we work is that we want to identify young people with entrepreneurial talent and potential, and then we nurture and support them through their school and university, and hopefully with the result that they will become entrepreneurs, or they'll be entrepreneurial in whatever way. However, we've got tools that show competencies at that particular time in their lives. It could be 12 or 13 years old, but we're not able to predict, based on those competencies, whether there's any way in which that potential will be realized in entrepreneurship. And so that's an interesting area for us, is how do we use all of this research to get to that point? And then lastly, just our model is also linked, for various reasons that I won't go into now, linked to academic performance. And I'm interested in whether academic performance is an indicator of entrepreneurial success, and also if you looked at the various degrees that are studied in a university, is there any particular degree or field of study that particularly lends itself to entrepreneurship? So I'm just giving you all our questions, not so much any answers. Yeah.
That's terrific. Well, thank you very much. Let's see, Chris, you also offered a little bit of your perspective, but just if you could elaborate.
Okay, a very, very quick summary. You don't want an introduction to Nesta, but
Nesta is enormous. Yeah, it's vast.
Coming up to 200 people now.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, we're an innovation foundation. We're not explicitly around promoting entrepreneurship, but most of our entrepreneurship-related research is particularly from the point of view of innovation policy. And what we want really is three things. So we want smarter innovation policy, which means better evidence of what works. We want it to be more inclusive, which is partly about widening the pool of prospective entrepreneurs, so allowing those who have entrepreneurial ambition to actually realize those ambitions. And we want entrepreneurship policy, innovation policy, to be more dynamic, which is often a matter of making it more nimble and about giving tools to policymakers to better enable them to actually see the kind of entrepreneurial landscape in real time. So partly this is about better data visualization, better mapping, dashboards, real-time data analytics, and sometimes novel metrics as well. In terms of your question, Phil, what works? Well, I think like many of us, we don't have the answers. We're trying to figure out how to get the answers. One of our big programs is something called the Innovation Growth Lab, which is dedicated to running randomized controlled trials in various areas of innovation policy. And my colleague Lou is going to talk this afternoon and give you a very quick overview of the 35 or so trials that we currently have underway. That's really about trying to get the kind of gold standard of evidence in certain areas of innovation policy. Outside of IGL, we have a program on accelerators that's been running for a number of years. So those of you here who have accelerator interests, I'm particularly interested in understanding your methods. What we're doing in the UK at the moment is we are undertaking regression discontinuity design type methodology to get around this issue of control groups, which kind of really dogs this area. So some of you will have seen the study that Mike Leatherby and Juanita Gonzalez-Aribe did of Startup Chile using the RDD methodology. We're applying that to accelerators and incubators in the UK, and by about September of this year, we should have the outputs of that. And we're hoping that that'll be a pretty robust indicator of actually, being able to quantify the impact that those programs make. Very briefly, then, just beyond that, we have a number of other interests around entrepreneurship. We're particularly interested in corporate collaboration. We're particularly interested in sort of mapping the components of ecosystems. Some of you will have seen the Digital City Index that we produced a couple of years ago. If not, you can go to digitalcityindex.eu, have a look at that index. We measured 60 different cities across Europe, about 40 different ecosystem factors that made up that composite index. And there's a corresponding idea bank, which was basically a collection of initiatives from really all over the world that we thought there was some evidence for supporting entrepreneurship, but what we did not do was sort of give you a sort of strength of evidence for those, but there might be some useful ideas there for you guys. I'll stop there, but Lou will talk a bit later about the IGL. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Actually, we're going to go to Korea Economic Foundation, and then we're going to have 3 minutes from OECD. Yeah. Come to the table. There's a spot. You can be Loden Foundation. Hold on a second. Oh, use the mic. Okay, that's fine. Okay.
Yeah, thank you for your great opinions about the education programs and then it's about its effectiveness. In Korea, we also have many considerations and surveys about entrepreneurship in education because since maybe this year, the Korean government also tried to make the entrepreneurship education as a public curriculum in middle school in ages in their 12 to 15. So they give them a free year on a half year or full year to they can experience whatever they want. But among them, there's some organizations and some departments, they prepared some entrepreneurship program for the teenagers. But the thing is, we have many ministries involved in this, but there are many considerations how to make it effective. So maybe it will be started this year, but there will be many practices and feedbacks between the ministry and students and parents. And Korean Entrepreneurship Foundation also do the research in Korea. I was very impressed by the opinion just before about we should, in countries like Korea, we should consider the cultural background when it comes to entrepreneurship, and we developed the entrepreneurship program because according to some survey, the most items that give impact to the entrepreneurs or potential entrepreneurs in Korea is kind of the first one is policy, and the second one is kind of the parent, their mindset, because it's very important in our culture to, it's kind of connections and communication between the parents, and then we do the future things. So we can discard this kind of aspect. So we do that kind of family camp to enhance their entrepreneurship. So these are the kind of things that are not common and not normal in this kind of stage, but it's kind of essential for a Korean perspective. So that's what we do. And then when it comes to learning by doing, we have many targets. I mean, when it comes to entrepreneurship educations, there are many programs from in their kindergartens to the elder people in Korea. But when it comes to the teenagers, elementary school students, it's not necessary to actually do something outside because it's very hard in reality. So we think about the gamification about the program because they can do in class with a card game and with a board game, where we did not develop the kind of digital game yet, but it can be one of the options. So we can gamify the programs and then they can participate in the program. It can be another option of learning by doing and when there is a kind of limitations to go outside.
Great. Okay. Can I take a quick poll, actually? How many people who are here now know that they won't be able to come back in the afternoon? Okay, so it'd be kind of nice to do our photo before lunch. And I'm guessing some people have 1 o'clock lunch meetings, and we have 8 minutes to go.
I will do it in the afternoon.
You do it in the afternoon, 2 o'clock?
Yeah, 2
okay.
o'clock first.
Ian, could you do it right after lunch? Okay. Malvika, why don't you want to go ahead now? We got 2 people who volunteered to go after lunch. Well, I mean, we want to balance it out because we also have some in the afternoon agenda. But would you prefer to wait, or would you rather do it now? What's that?
I'd rather do it now.
Do it after lunch?
I'll do it now.
Do it now, please do. Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
So I'm Malvika, I'm with Mars Data Catalyst, and for context, a lot of the research that we've done is looking at entrepreneurship as it relates to firm creation. But as we build out our research stream, we are interested in looking beyond that as well, and looking to collaborate with people on that. And I'll speak in terms of the question, what works? So Data Catalyst collects venture outcome data on companies that work with Mars Discovery District and other innovation centers across the province. So with that, we aim to provide evidence for programs and policies that support these companies. And what we initially, it's about 5-6 years that we have this data set for. Initially, it was informing what kind of companies are in this portfolio and looking broadly at services like mentorship, how much, what industry-specific knowledge, and what accelerator programs, for example, could help. But we've gotten better at creating this iterative cycle of providing feedback, improving those programs and policies, and getting more specific about that. So when I put in a suggestion on the poll, it was cheating because we have more well-developed programs in place, and now we're putting evaluation and measurement frameworks in place to measure how that actually worked. So looking at our friends at Nesta and the IGL to incorporate some of that randomized controlled trial methodology to measure that as well. But we've seen what mentorship has been a big focus, and one of Mars's core services is to facilitate those strategic partnerships and access to capital. But you also realize that once companies scale to a certain stage, mentorship will only take them so far. They need an injection of capital in some form, whether that's VCs or grants. And so we've tried to create more targeted programs that are coupling those vouchers from the government with mentorship opportunities and trying to suss out how that works. Right now, it's in a few specific sectors and very specific criteria about what the scaling company is. But we're looking to do more of that, where we are benchmarking our companies against portfolios around the world and in peer jurisdictions to see whether these programs are as effective as we think they are, and how whether we're collecting the right indicators to do that. So that's the kind of work that we're interested in. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Maybe just quickly in the context of the entrepreneurial mindset. So one big research area is for us the future of work, and in that context, one of the public policy questions is how to build a resilient workforce. Not only who is the next Warren Buffett, but how can people really be resilient in a disrupted work life. And so this is one of the areas that we want to expand on, and we are happy to collaborate on that front in this group.
Great, okay. So I know Tatiana is not here. Oh. That's embarrassing. That's embarrassing. Well, no, I did look over your way. Tatiana, okay. So Tatiana, you're going to close us out. Matteo? Yep. Okay, so Matteo Can you do, could you both come back after lunch? One of you is going to go now. You can't. You're going to go now. Can you come back after lunch? Okay, so you're going to go after lunch. Ian's going to go after lunch. And Marco's going to go after lunch. This is going to be the after lunch crew. Okay? You're up. Sorry, Tatiana.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, at UNCTAD, we have, as a development agency, we have 2 areas of research. One is policy work, and another one is capacity building. So for the policy work, I think we presented it already last year at least. We developed entrepreneurship policy framework, which is a framework document which we tailor to countries with which we work to develop, enabling entrepreneurship ecosystem, and it also has a mapping methodology in there. So this year, these last 2 years, we worked with 6 countries in Latin America and in Africa. So we are going to do an update, a revision of this EPF. And based on this, we also developed policy guide for youth. And now we're developing policy guide on entrepreneurship and migration. Again, as a development agency, we really had to focus on, things of a more, a generic nature to facilitate development in general. And on capacity building, I already mentioned the program which is called Empretech, which is really an interesting program. It's exactly about mindset. And it's based on McClelland methodology developed at Harvard. I know that it's contested. We discussed with Professor Kelly last year. But the thing is that, it's not only the methodology, this research about key competences of successful entrepreneurs, which McClelland developed, but also the methodology to actually apply it to individual people and to make them successful entrepreneurs based on these key competences. So what we do is that we actually select not only talented entrepreneurs, but we select people, with ideas, also mature entrepreneurs and other target groups depending on priorities of countries in which we work. We measure their entrepreneurial potential based on this scale or whatever, 10 key competences. So to identify their weak and strong points, and then over the 6 days, based on this learning by doing, and developing some specific exercises in the room and outside of the room. It's about 50% of, actually maybe 70% is outside of the room. And so then by the end of the 6 days, so they know well what are their weak and strength points and where they really can facilitate their success. And it's really very impactful. I already brought a couple of examples. There are extraordinary success stories. For example, in one of our later group, there was one owner of several medium-sized enterprises. And so when he was asked why he came to the workshop, he said that he was a bit lost because one of these enterprises was dying and he didn't know what to do with that, to bankrupt, to sell it, or maybe to do some sort of transformation. So then he thought that the course would answer this question. We don't teach any hard skills. It's really about soft skills, about behaviors, about competences, about attitudes. And after 3 months, we had an impact assessment workshop with this group that we had in the workshop, and this particular person said that he told the story, and then after 3 months he said that now he has a different challenge because the growth rate of this dying company is so high that he needs to get more financing to finance it. We have a young girl student in her early 20s in Uganda who was from a very poor family. After the workshop, soon after, actually, she became an owner of a construction company, and now she's one of celebrities in her country, in Uganda. And it's Uganda, where there is a huge problem of female access, women access to land. So there are really very interesting things. So I'm wrapping up, but what I want to say is that, we have this program for 30 years in about 40 countries. We have about 20 requests that we look financing for, but I would really like to appeal to this research, group to maybe actually work with us, to help us to understand better why the impact is so high. Great. Because the impact is very high. So we can discuss it further on, because that would be an interesting study to do. Thank you.
I think, so we have plenty of partners in that. Thank you very much. Okay, so this is what's going to happen. First of all, after lunch, we have an all-star lineup. You still don't know what their collaborative areas. 50% of people who've never been to a GERN meeting, you don't know what our collaborative areas are, so you have to come back after lunch to find out about that. We also have, the part of our all-star lineup is the folks who've very graciously volunteered to wait after lunch. Please come promptly at 2, because we did begin late. That wasn't your doing, a bunch of people in the room. I just didn't know how many people we're going to have, but now that we have a sense of who's here, we're going to really begin promptly at 2, and these guys will kick us off. I'm not done yet. There are new entries onto the Slido. There are a bunch of new entries. These are all the things that came in online. So we wanted to start with it in the room, but you have homework in the next hour to read through those and upvote those. Okay? And then basically at like quarter of, I'm going to start to distill these into the poll. We'll just do that while we're having discussions. We're not going to take time out for that. We're going to multitask so that by the time we have our unconference break, we'll have already voted on that and we can break into small groups and get into action. So we're going to drive pretty hard to action, but it's not going to be as discussion oriented as the morning was. We're going to have these presentations and then it's going to be push to get to some conclusions, because we actually need conclusions coming out of this to figure out what we're going to do in the coming year. This is the vehicle by which we do that. Okay? So anything else? Okay, see you at 2 p.m.